Welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. Continual watching beyond this point may result in terminal face palming and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
All right, welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. My guest, unfortunately, is running a little bit late. I did hear from him about an hour or two ago and was scheduled for 3 o'clock, but I haven't heard from him since then. But I have to start regardless. And my other guest, unfortunately, was Eric Hernandez. He's not feeling well. He has the flu. His family's not feeling well. They are under the weather. He'll be joining us next week. My heartfelt condolences to his family and to him that they're not feeling well. Oh, I do have some people joining, so let me get them in here in a second. Oh, here we go. Hey, we got some people already. Oh, I see a top of a head. Hi, Cy.
Oh man, I can't hear you. I don't know why.
Oh, I can hear you, Brandon, but I can't see Dr. Garte here. There we go. I mean, I can't hear. Okay, there we go.
I found someone.
Oh, there you go. Let me unmute there. The outside could hear me, but okay. So anyways, I was just introducing you kind of, sort of, because I knew you were running late, but can you hear me? Hi?
Yes.
Everybody can?
I can hear.
Awesome, Mundo. All right, so let me reiterate for you guys. I was going to have Eric Hernandez join. He is a Christian apologist that I'm friends with, that I have a lot of respect for. Don't agree with him on everything, obviously. But his family is sick. He's sick, and so he'll be joining us next week. Hopefully, Cy can also come on then, because I know you really want to have a discussion with him. But I do have Dr. Cy Garte here. Hey, I got Hank and I got Brandon, and anybody else who wants to join, up to 6 people that wants to talk about this particular topic, which in a nutshell is basically what I want to discuss is the state of Christian apologetics on YouTube as far as it's come over the last decade or so, because I've noticed some changes, and I've noticed some recapitulation, I guess, of the old style of type of format that theists used to have, opposed to the newer style of people like Dr. Garte and other apologists like Eric Hernandez, Inspired Philosophy, Capturing Christianity, who elevate the conversation to at least a little higher level. So I thought we'd have a panel discussion. If you're in the live chat and you want to join, the link is pinned to the live chat. If I know who you are, if not, message me. But anyways, let me introduce my guest real quick. I've got Hank and Brandon. People, you guys remember them from my primary channel, of course. We have Hank and Brandon.
But
So
yeah, now I'm recognized as a notorious panel hopper.
Nice, the panel hopper. And then, of course, we have Dr. Cy Garte, who has a PhD in biochemistry and is making a name for himself in the apologetics community, which, by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, Cy, but did I not call that? Did I not say you'd be popular?
You might have. I don't remember.
Well, I mean, you've been on the Non-Sequitur Show before, and I've always promoted you.
I've been on this Non-Sequitur Show. I think the first time was 10 years ago. Almost. I don't remember. Whenever you guys started,
it was 5 years ago. It seems like 10 years.
Well, it seems like the same.
But I think the first time you were on was in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, so I'm just going to start this off, and like I said, if other people join and want to join the conversation, I'll be asking some questions, and I'll be taking questions from the live chat. But let me ask this question. Cy, have you noticed any change in Christian apologetics when you have people out there, the newer crop of people that are just repeating the same arguments we've seen years ago? And I will bring up some names. People know that I've had Rob Groin, what's his last name? Rob on before, and of course there's Red Pill Apologist, who I get along with just fine. I don't agree with any of his arguments, but they're basically running the same old atheist hate God type approach, right? Rather than talking about any of the actual arguments for or against God. Have you noticed that in your apologetics?
Well, you know, it's funny because I've never really considered myself to be an apologist. I just don't know enough to do that. I mean, I'm, as you know, I'm kind of new to the faith, right? And apologists have to know a lot. I mean, they not only have to know the basics of Christianity, they have to know a lot of biblical scholarship, which I don't. They have to understand the arguments for and against, and I know some of them, but I don't. I consider myself a very limited apologist, only to issues related to science, which is what I do know about. And so in that sense, perhaps I am an apologist. But the people you mentioned are the people who I follow and listen to and admire. You know, Michael Jones at Inspiring Philosophy, Cameron Bertuzzi at Capturing Christianity, and a few others, some of whom you mentioned, some you didn't. And, you know, the thing about apologetics that I see is that everyone has their own style and also their own viewpoints, which are not always the same. What makes Eric so great is that Eric Hernandez so great is that he's really done a deep dive into seeing what works in apologetics. In other words, what arguments are really persuasive and what aren't. And he's written a great book about that. Are you aware of that book, Steve? I think it's called The Lazy.
I haven't read it, but I'm familiar that he's been writing a lot of stuff. I mean, Eric is a well-researched individual. I got the pleasure of actually meeting him in person,
right?
And he's an actual nice guy. Actually, really
he's a great guy, right? Yeah. A good friend, and very thoughtful. I mean, I've heard him do debates where I would have walked out of the room because
he has a high threshold.
I'm not that patient, but he's really very sympathetic, and he's written a book about how to do it, and I think that book is great, you know. And but for example, as you know, Steve, I'm not good at philosophy, right?
No, I wouldn't say that, but whatever.
Well, you should. And so, you know, philosophical arguments are not my thing. I get lost. I don't understand all the terms. So I don't do that kind of stuff. And basically, as I said, I restrict my own, whatever I do, I restrict it to things related to science in general.
Yeah, I think you were thrust into the limelight as far as apologetics because, you know, you do have a scientific background. I know that you have a very strong views on your Christianity, but as a scientist, you also accept things like evolutionary biology. You know very well some of the people I've had on the guest before with reasons to believe, like Dr. Hugh Ross and Dr. Fuzz Rana, who are one of the most amazing people I've ever met, even though, again, don't agree with them on theology. And even I don't agree with them on even some of the science stuff, but they are two of the nicest people ever, seriously. But I think you were thrust into that position because of your expertise in biochemistry. And of course, that relates a lot to if there's some kind of God from some kind of designer point of view or a teleological point of view rather than strictly teleonomic. Would you say that that's why a lot of them are boosting you up? And a lot of your testimony is your personal experiences. I get that. It's experiential. Right. You don't really argue from a strong theological point of view like the Bible, and you don't argue for a lot from you know, a normal apologist point of view for running philosophical arguments. It's mostly a lot of anecdotal personal testimony, which you admit to, nothing wrong with that. And of course, your understanding of science and your application of science to some kind of actual intelligent being that may have created us, correct?
Right. That's well put. I think that's true.
I've gotten better at what I do over the last 5 years. I appreciate that. I like to be succinct for my audience. They have a low attention span. Just kidding, guys. Everybody just goes away. But yeah. So in that regard, and I'll bring in some of the other panel members. We mentioned Capturing Christianity. We mentioned Inspiring Philosophy. I again, two decent people. I have issues with some of their science. The way they present quantum mechanics and some other things, but that's neither here nor there. I think that they really do want to have honest discussions, which I respect. But what I've seen And I brought this to my primary channel. There's a video description link in this video description that I talk about similar things. That I've seen a new type of apologist that doesn't want to really talk about the fundamental issues involved with there being a God. And now people know that I have no position on that. I don't like theology. I don't like talking about whether God exists or not. It's not my forte. As you know, Sai said, you have to know a lot about biblical stuff and history of Christianity, which I have no interest in. And so I don't really dive into those topics. What I talk about is people having those discussions and being at least not using fallacious arguments, right? But I've noticed a crop of people that are using similar fallacious arguments. Like, I remember, do you remember, it might be before your time, it was, but do you remember Shock of God? Does that name ring a bell with anybody?
Yeah, it rings a bell. Yeah.
Yeah, I know them.
Yeah, so he left a message. He left a message on one of my videos a couple of days ago, and I reached out to him to see if he wanted to join for a panel discussion, because his trope was basically, can any atheist, prove God exists or whatever? What was his catchphrase?
God does not exist.
Yeah, anybody have proof or empirical evidence that God does not exist or whatever it was, which is just a ridiculous type of argumentation.
I assume we're setting aside the horrible use of the word prove there.
Yeah, of course. It's equivocation of the word prove. I'll look up his exact quote so I can get it out there. But it's that kind of argumentation and rhetoric. And we have another apologist just recently, Rob, who's running the argument, atheists hate God. Have you all heard that before?
Yeah, I actually run that argument too. I call many atheists Abrahamic misotheists because they use the same metaphysics, which is generally Platonic metaphysics.
And they would be misotheists. And that's what I pointed out.
I run that argument too.
I have literally pointed out to him that exact same argument, that if atheists hate God, and I'm talking about the object, not the concept. There's a reference and a referent. So there's an object and there's a concept, and the concept relates to the object. The concept we can say exists or not as an abstraction, but the object itself that is referring to is in question of the ontological presence. So he's saying that atheists hate God as the object, not the concept, which means if they believe there's a actual being called God, that would put them in the set of theist. And since they think God, they hate God, that'd be mesotheism.
Right.
Would you agree with that, Sai? And then I'll get John.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So it's that kind of argumentation that I see coming around again. John, I think you've seen that. And while you talk on that, I'm going to look at the exact quote that Shock of God had, because I don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah, I mean the atheists hate God position, in my experience, tends to come from the presuppers more than anybody else.
That's true. I've seen that. I agree.
They presuppose God, and they can't bend their brains around the fact that other people wouldn't also presuppose God. And then they just run it straight into the fact that atheism is the antithesis of theism, and then their ship sinks.
What a tongue twister.
But that makes perfect sense, except for the fact that there's a whole bunch of gods, and they're not individual atheist groups for those other gods that talk about them all day long.
Well, exactly. So I would actually say, for myself personally, with what I do know of Christian theism, with the specific Christian God, I would actually say that I am an atheist, because I think there are internal contradictions that mean that it's impossible, in the same way as a married bachelor is impossible. Based on, if you judge the book by its internal logic, it doesn't have an internal logic that stands up. You have to bend over backwards to make it, to rationalize it. So I think I could actually justify an atheist position with regards to certain specific dogmas and doctrines, but from the deist position, I have to be logically consistent and say that I'm agnostic.
And you and I have talked many times on this, and I kind of have the similar position, right? People know I'm agnostic to the global aspect of there being a deity, but as far as the Christian, the God, I people want to call me an atheist for that particular God. It doesn't bother me, but I don't hold to that label because I'm not an atheist philosophically speaking, right? Because we're talking about any God. But I looked it up, and what Shock of God says is, what proof or evidence do you have that atheism is true and correct? That was a shtick, which is so bad. It's an equivocation of the word proof, and basically, to be an atheist, and to be rationally held rather than just like an atheist, to be rationally held, then all you need is justification. And as John pointed out, the justification one of them could be internal inconsistencies, right? Just like I believe that Garte is well justified to be a theist. This is why I probably build a lot of bridges between the atheist and theist communities, because I think it's really more about how you justify your beliefs. And I think, obviously Garte would obviously disagree with John as far as there being internal inconsistencies, but I would hope that they at least respect each other's position, and that's the kind of conversations I like to foster.
And the word...
Go ahead.
I was going to say...
Go ahead, Brandon.
And the word correct, though, I'm not sure what he means by that is correct.
What he's doing is basically asking, how can you prove atheism is the case? And he's using it propositionally as philosophers do, right? Because in philosophy, we can only test propositions. You don't test for psychological beliefs. So when people say atheism is just some lack of belief, it makes no sense. You can't test for that. It doesn't have any effect. It doesn't have any relevance to ontological presence. We want to talk about if God exists or not. That's a proposition, not a mindset. And so he's asking, what proof or evidence that you have that atheism is true, meaning that God doesn't exist? And there's a whole bunch of evidence for that. It's also evidence, I believe, for God. And you have to weigh the two. And some people will come to a different conclusion, but there is evidence for both sides. And so
you also get into the crazy ass discussion around what constitutes evidence, and the claim itself counts as evidence.
Yes, that's true. And what's so funny is Cameron Pertuzzi had said that, and I think it was, and I and other people that happen to like a little bit of philosophy ran with that, and we people accuse me of then being a theist, right? I literally had some of the days today in Facebook say I was a closet Christian. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
I don't understand the attitude that people have that the claim itself isn't evidence. You can say that it's not good evidence.
Yeah, or you can say it's not empirical or scientific evidence, sure.
But a witness statement is a claim and is evidence.
Correct.
Yeah.
If a witness statement is a claim and is an accusatory claim and is evidence, then all claims. The proposition has to count as evidence.
Right, exactly. So, Sai, I mean, would you agree that that's just not a way to... I mean, I know you don't consider yourself an apologist, but you're representing them a little bit here. Not to put you on the spot. I would never do that to you. Mad respect for you. But would you agree that asking a question like what proof or evidence you have that atheism is true and correct is just not... It's not even a sensical question to really ask, because you can ask the theist the same question: what proof or evidence you have that theism is true or correct? And then all you're asking for is why somebody believes something. I mean, because you cannot ask for a proof of something that we all know if they had actual logical proof that you can do by an argument, a logical argument, most people would believe one way or the other.
Well, I personally believe that the whole concept of proof and evidence should be taken off the table here. Because it's misused, especially proof. I mean,
I agree.
For example, people have said, what scientific proof do you have for whatever? And the answer to that is science doesn't do proof.
Correct.
Proof, as you know, comes from math and it comes from logic. But there's nothing that's proven in science. There's very, very strong evidence. We know the theory of gravity is true. We know the theory of evolution is true. There's evidence for these theories are overwhelming. But they're not proven in the sense that you talk about a mathematical proof, where, one or a logical proof, where two propositions or whatever, an axiom is used, and then you prove the reality of a mathematical theorem. You can't do that in science.
Yeah, and it's so funny. And I get accused of being anti-science because I say that exact same thing.
Well, yeah, no, it's the other way around. You're pro-science if you say that. And you can ask any scientist, doesn't matter what their religious or non-religious views are, they will all agree. That's the nature of science. One of the great things that scientists love to do is show that something that was thought to be proven is not actually true. And that's considered a major advance when that happens. Yeah. Now, in terms of evidence, I don't know if you remember this, Steve, but I think it was on NonSequitur Show. I had a debate with Aaron Roth. I think the last time I spoke with him, it was about the nature of evidence. It was a very cordial debate. We didn't have it was on Modern Day Debate. It was a very cordial discussion. And the issue was what I brought up was you can't say there's no evidence for whatever, even in this case it was God, which Aaron always says there's no evidence for God. Well, if you say there's no evidence, what you really mean is there's no really strong, convincing evidence. But there is evidence for all kinds of things. There's evidence that there is no God. The problem of evil is always cited as evidence for the lack of a divine being who's all powerful and all good, right? Why would an all powerful, all good being allow evil and suffering? But there's evidence for God. There's scientific evidence, there's experiential evidence, there's plenty of evidence. And in fact, if you take away this issue and just look at in general, is there evidence that, take any example you want, something in the news, is there evidence that Trump has done this thing or that thing? Yes, there is. There's also evidence that, that he hasn't done it. I mean, there's weak evidence and there's strong evidence. And the other thing I like to bring out while I'm on this kick, and then I'll stop, is that you often hear this phrase, which I think began with Carl Sagan, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I think it was Sagan, or maybe it was Hitchens, one of them coined that. The problem with that is that in scientific work, there is no such thing as extraordinary evidence. If you can look at any paper published in the scientific literature, you will find comments like, this is strong evidence for my conclusion, or this is weak evidence for what I think is sufficient evidence, right? But nobody ever says extraordinary evidence. That's just made up. That's not a real thing. So extraordinary claims do require strong evidence to be believed. And is that an important issue? No, because it's a question of definition.
Yeah.
But it's still important to understand that there's strong evidence and weak evidence. And the atheists I know who are really, I know a lot of atheists who are very intelligent, scholarly people, and they will all agree on this issue that there is what they consider weak evidence for the existence of God, but not sufficient to allow them to believe. It's just, it's various kinds of things in science, in physics, etc.
I want to talk about a different class of apologists that I feel, or I guess more effective, the bomb thrower types like Dr. David Wood, Atul Tash, Jay Smith, Muslim skeptic, in some sense, Andrew Wilson. So
let's table that for a second. We can talk about that. Let's address what Cy said first, because I think it's important real quick. Because I agree with everything he said. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence was Carl Sagan, which to me, most scientists that I know really don't adhere to that for that very reason, because it introduces a subjective evaluation to what should be objective measurements. And so I argue with even atheists on that. I'm like, look, I'm a non-believer, you guys are non-believers, and you're just saying extraordinary claims. What does that mean? That's subjective, right? Sure. Now, I understand colloquially what they're trying to do, but in science doesn't, one, prove anything. We all agree with that. What it does is it observes natural phenomenon and tries to come up with a naturalistic explanation, because it adheres to methodological naturalism. But there is a great book out there, Cy. It's by Nicholas Everett. It's called The Non-Existence of God. And he actually differentiates like a dozen different levels of evidence. Marginally increases, weak evidence, sub-evidence, suggestives, makes a real possibility, fairly good evidence, makes more likely than not, strong evidence, very strong evidence, overwhelming evidence, and proves. I think it's a far more nuanced way to differentiate what we mean by evidence. Because if something is just testimonial, something is just anecdotal, then somebody can put it as weak or marginally, because it's still evidence. I agree. Right. But you have a logical proof that's beyond rapport. If your proof is valid and sound, your conclusion must be true. It follows from the true premises. And so I agree with that wholeheartedly. Go ahead.
Well, it's also the case that, with what was being said there, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I think you're right to take it in the colloquial rather than the assumption that it was the inception of a new type standard of evidence. I think it's the claim that if you make a claim that Jesus came back from the dead, that is an extraordinary claim.
Because you mean out of the ordinary. You just mean something you don't usually see all the time.
It's out of the ordinary. So extraordinary, out of the ordinary.
But how easy would it be to prove that or to demonstrate that? You just show Jesus, right? I mean, if you say God exists, in theory, that would be real simple. Here's God, right? In theory.
What I mean is because that flies in the face of all of our experience since people don't just pop back alive without people have obviously died and with significant medical intervention. Nobody
not brain death, but not right.
But you know, for a given value of death, people have come back from the dead with you know, adrenaline to the heart or whatever the case may be. But somebody being dead for 3 days and then coming back from the dead, that would be an extraordinary thing to have happen, because it does fly in the face of but the claim of the Bible is that is an extraordinary thing because it's a special case because of who the person was.
Yeah, but
so actually being extraordinary
can not exist still. That doesn't really make any difference. Necromancy can exist and gods can still not exist.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but you would agree though, if somebody rationally comes to that conclusion, like Garte's a very intelligent man who I have massive respect for. He knows, you know, I'm a non-believer. He respects me for it. I respect his position because I think that seriously, he came to his position through very reasoned, well-formulated rationalizations. Now, could that belief be wrong? Of course, I think he may be incorrect on that. But how he got there is only he knows, right? I can't get inside his head and understand his mindset because I've been there myself. I was a theist too. I know my mindset of why I became a theist way back when, and then how I fell away. And I thought very rational in my approach, and I still kind of do, right? I don't think I made any major logical, you know, errors in my reasoning. I just didn't have enough information at the time to get to the position I am now. Go ahead.
I actually sort of envy you that position of having used to have been a theist and not be a theist, because I have never been a theist. I have never believed in God to the extent that my dad got asked. I think he sent me to Sunday school like maybe 2 or 3 weekends when I was a kid. Probably not because he was religious, but I just think because he wanted to free up his weekend, and he got asked not to bring me back.
Yeah, I used to be an atheist.
I have a question.
Okay,
I used to be an atheist, and I became a theist, but not a Christian.
Yeah, and Sai used to be an atheist for the majority of his life. He didn't convert till later part of his life. You know, I wouldn't say he was a staunch atheist. So you weren't like an atheist activist. You just didn't have.
I don't know what my future holds, but the reason that I envy that position is because it would allow me to empathize with theists better had I been in that position in the past. I think it would actually that would be a worthwhile experience.
You know, you get all sides, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe that's why Sai and have such a good rapport. Is, you know, I was never an atheist, but I was a theist when I was 17 for a couple of years. Now I'm agnostic. He was an atheist. Now he's Christian. So we have that to draw upon. We have our experiences from different beliefs, right? Which I think is advantageous. Because Brandon, do you have a question? Go ahead. Let's answer then, Brandon. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll just answer. Yeah, I mean, I grew up as an atheist. It's kind of I have for those who don't know, I have an unusual background. My folks were very, very strong atheists. I mean, beyond anyone you know, and
Hitchens level.
So I grew up. Sorry,
Christopher Hitchens level. Yeah.
Oh, way beyond Hitchens. No, they hated religion, and so I grew up totally atheist and remained that way for the first half of my life. And the story how I changed is too long to go into, but yeah. So I'm very familiar with that idea.
In the live chat real quick, and then I'll get Brandon's question. James Pag, if you want to join, the link to join is in the video description, or excuse me, in the live chat. Come on in, because he's just wondering how anybody could be atheist, and that's a whole different story. That's a whole different topic, because we're discussing Christian apologists. We'll do another show on why it's reasonable to be atheist. But Brandon, you have a question?
So we can talk about David Ward.
One sec, Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you lean more towards the Adam and Eve creation or abiogenesis?
Okay, so you're asking, am I a creationist, or do I follow or do I hold evolution?
The creation part of how the first people were made, or how the first cells were made. Yeah. Abiogenesis, or that
Well-
Adam was created from clay and he was, yeah.
Yeah, do you take a literal read on the text, or is it portions of it?
No, I don't take the literal read, and however, in terms of abiogenesis, that's something that's actually I publish on. We know that life started, but we don't know how, and we're not close at all to understanding how. Now, did that mean that God created life? I believe, as a matter of faith, that God created everything, including life and people. But as a scientist, I still want to know how. And so far, we can't approach that problem because we don't have the tools. We've tried to, and we're not making much progress. So we need some new tools. We
In
need some new
relation to
scientific
Brandon's,
tools.
sorry, in relation to Brandon's question, I'm curious to know how you, because this leads into one of the sort of like the internal contradictions with Christianity that I can't really get past. Your take on it, to me, is the more reasonable, far more sort of abiogenesis and a process of guided evolution, steered evolution by some kind of deity. It would be the only way that I think I could bring myself to any kind of meaningful faith, because the evidence for evolution is so overwhelming. But there are claims that the Christian faith makes in terms of God is all-knowing, he created everything, and we have free will. So if he created it, he's all-knowing, then there is a degree of determinism to the universe, and determinism seems to be counter to the concept of free will. The choices that I've made are predetermined. So I'm curious to know, how did you rationalize or square that circle?
Well, I believe that free will is real, and that, by the way, happens to be a belief that I inherited from my original humanist atheist position, because the attack on free will by the quote new atheists is kind of crazy to me. I mean, that free will is one of the things that that
I deny free will, so we could have that. We'll have a different show on free will.
Humanist atheists have always championed the idea of free will because it went against the idea of, sort of the Calvinistic version.
Well,
they
champion freedom. I don't know specifically about libertarian free will, and maybe there's some conflation of terms there.
Well, okay, that can get complicated. I know,
right? Because I'm a soft compatibilist. That can get complicated.
Then we get into these philosophical issues.
Right. So let me ask you this. Finish up. Go ahead.
The Sam Harris approach to free will, I think, is just completely wrong. I think his science is terrible, and he misinterprets things. And philosophically, the idea that everything is determined, I think, is nonsense. So now we'll get back to your question, John, which is, well, if that's true, what about the determinism implied by God being all-knowing and knows what's going to happen? And,
right. Well, that's why they have modalism and middle knowledge arguments.
So right. So the answer, which I don't know what the answer is, but my sense is that when we talk about God, we have no idea what we're saying or what we're talking about, because we don't understand. God is not somebody who is a really smart, clever guy and does all kinds of things for purposes that we can understand. There's a lot of mystery there in how God operates. So when we put our human terms like deterministic, free will oriented, even good and evil, we don't know if any of that applies to God or if God is involved in that. I mean, I have my own views, but they're just my opinions. I can't back them up with anything, either theology or anything else. And my opinion is that, this might be an experiment that God is doing,
simulation theory.
A simulation. Yeah. I mean,
do you think that, if God did make all of us, right, he had to at least put some kind of epistemic limits on our cognitive functions. He had to make it so we could not apprehend him. And I would think that's actually makes sense, right? You have an infinite being of some kind. We're finite beings. I don't know if even God could make something so temporal with some sort of a physical, substrate called the brain. apprehend something so massive. I think that's just a fact, a nomological fact that we would never be able to have that much storage information to apprehend what God would really be. Correct?
That would apply with simulation theory as well, because
of course,
within the simulation you can't outpace the limits of the hardware that your simulation is running on. So.
That's right.
Well, that would even mean that the people even back then that were apparently being inspired by God didn't exactly know.
They knew less.
What was going? Yeah.
You know,
I don't think any human knows what's going on.
I agree with you.
I think about it like, I walk in my backyard and I see some ants and I step on them. Do they have any clue what's going on?
Okay, so that's a brilliant point to bring up, though, because it goes back to the Christian apologetics things. Because I see this often: atheists chose to go to hell or going to hell. Atheists will burn for eternity. But by the way, is argumenting ad baculum. Apologists out there, that's a bad way to convince people, I assure you, because of the...
I agree.
Yeah, it has the entrenchment effect, the backfire effect. I don't know any atheist that ever said, I believe because of fear of hell. Maybe
you're just going to get a fuck you back, aren't you, basically?
I'm sorry, what?
Pascal's wager.
Excuse my language, but you're just going to get a fuck you back.
That's it's just, I mean, Alex O'Connor, he's talked about his fear of hell and how he got over it because it was so instilled in him. But most people, that's not a good argument because, again, Pascal's wager, it could be any god. And personally, if there's an omnibenevolent being out there, that the thought of hell just makes no sense. It's incompatible with that kind of deity. It would have to be some kind of moral universal, or something, not moral, but just universalism, right? Everybody's kind of saved, which doesn't make sense as far as Christianity, who limits that to only a specific number of people. But again, there are Christians out there that do hold universalism that say, look, man is saved through Jesus, but all men will eventually, come to salvation. That is a form of Christianity. But let me ask, aside, you already agree that it's not a good argument for Christian apologists. But what do you say to those people that use threats like that? I mean, as somebody that you're a kind person, how do they? To me, they have to be a little bit sadistical, because it seems like they want people to suffer. They want suffrage. They want to see people get their comeuppance for not believing the exact same way that a specific individual Christian had believed. And I find that to be morally repugnant, to be honest with you.
Well, I do too. I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm not sure I believe in hell in the first place. I don't. Okay, really
you're agnostic
know.
on that, basically.
I am. I don't know. And I had do you remember Robert Reed?
Of course.
Of course. An atheist, right? Nice guy. I had a discussion with him many, many years ago, and he was talking about why he's an atheist and left the faith.
Really? You had a discussion with Robert Reed, the big black guy from Twitter?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, he's awesome.
Player.
Yeah, that dude's huge,
he's
man.
a great guy.
Yeah, really nice guy. I've known him for a very long time. I didn't know you had a discussion with him.
We had this really interesting conversation, and I said to him, well, I'm not sure hell is even real. And he couldn't believe it. His jaw literally dropped. And he said, you may not believe in hell? I said, yeah, I don't think it's necessary. And I could swear that he was now thinking, wait a minute, maybe I should go back. Not really.
Yeah.
But
so
anyway,
you're allowed to have your own thoughts on the matter, right?
Yeah. And I'm not alone. I mean, there are a lot of. I don't know if you know the channel Bread of Life, Rebecca Davis. It's a small channel, but she's an apologist who mostly talks with atheists.
Get her in touch with me.
She's great, and she is a young Earth creationist.
Oh my!
But she doesn't believe. She doesn't believe in hell.
Okay,
she believes it. So it's
Well, let's talk about that real quick. Then I think Hank wants to ask a question. The modern, newer Christian apologists. You have two types. You have the people like inspiring philosophy and capturing Christianity. I'll put them in the A level. Right, they're really known for their apologetics. You also have the super A level, would be Trent Horn. William Lane Craig, whether you agree with him or not. When I have shown he's made some mistakes. Well, actually, Alex Malpass showed that he made some mistakes, and I put it on my blog on his understanding of modal logic. I think was wrong, but you have and they're all again old Earth creationists. They do believe in theistic guided evolution, but they all accept the age of the Earth, which is just But then you have these newer ones that are talking about younger creationism and putting it as part of Christianity, which that only came about when Usher's chronology started coming around. And so the ones that I notice are the ones that have better discussions are the ones that reject young Earth creationists. I have not met a young Earth creationist that seems to be able to hold a candle in these types of debates and discussions. Not a single solitary one. Most of them are very bombastic, or very mercurial, very capricious. They can change their things on a dime. They get really upset. They get really mad easily. They're very things very personally. They feel
I like Lujack.
George Lujack.
Yeah.
Oh no! Oh my God! I can't believe.
Let me tell you, dude. Sorry, Lujack.
Do you remember,
dude. First, George Lujack is going to come back on Non-Sequitur. I'm booking him as we speak.
George,
swear to God, it may or may not exist. George is coming back, baby. George is coming back.
That man a gun and had him.
You got to send them the link.
I figure if I'm going to get canceled for the 12th time, I'm going to go out big. I am bringing George back on.
George is amazing.
He was on a nonsense. What was that? Must have been 2017. I don't know what. But first, Aaron was arguing with him. Then I got on. And he's also a nasty fellow.
Oh yeah. Oh dude, I will straight up tell you that George, and look, George knows this. He was the worst apologist I've ever had on this show, bar none.
Oh,
he holds the all-time record. And look, I don't hold him against you. So I don't hold George Lujack against any Christian because he was so bad. He was so. But why do you think I want him back on? It was it was the best dumpster fire this channel's ever had. I think.
Oh no, that was unique.
Yeah,
that was a good one.
Andrew Wilson. I mean, he was just on Non-Sequitur, and he had this famous debate with Matt Dillahunty, in which Matt left in the first 15 minutes.
Yeah, and let me tell people. So I had Andrew Wilson on, who is on the channel The Crucible, and I know he has a pretty large following. Some people love him, some people hate him. I will go on record. The dude was super polite with me, very responsive. Absolutely no issues with setting anything up. He was very cordial both before and after and during the debate. Nothing whatsoever that I find objective to anything as far as setting up the discussions. Do I agree with him theologically speaking? No, but he was able to have a cordial discussion, and huge props for that. I know he can be very, very aggressive in his style, but he wasn't in the discussion. He wasn't with me, so I will give a shout out, respect to Andrew Wilson, whether you like him or not. I know a lot of people hate him because they think he's some kind of patriarchy, male chauvinist, alpha male, and be that as may, I have to be objective and say that he was very, 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 I guess cordial would be the good word, and I have a lot of respect for that. So, but yeah, you're right, Hank. You watched the episode with Andrew, so you what were your views on that? It was his style of apologetics, which we didn't much get into, but you know of him. But that's a good instance of a Orthodox Catholic apologist that you've seen his videos on.
Yes, so I really like his style. He goes straight for the throat. He goes directly at the philosophical basis for his opponent.
He gets to the core of the matters.
Yeah, he gets to the core of the matters. He internalizes the opponent and goes straight for the weakest point.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, and mad respect for that. I hope that he does watching some of our Non-Sequitur shows and reviews them and keeps it on that level, because I'm not the argumentative type when it comes to these types of topics. When it comes to the existence of God, I am maybe with some other topics, but I like to have a more stable dialogue, more interesting dialogue. I think they have more of an effect to the audience because people want to be educated on these subjects rather than just have massive dumpster fires. But those are good too. Don't be wrong.
Yeah, I'm curious at the hell thing with Sai. Do you believe in a limbo, that sinners that die will go to limbo and have their sins like burned away from them, and then they'll go to heaven? Or
isn't limbo Catholic?
I have to say that
the Catholic Church rescinded their dogma on limbo, purgatory.
Wow.
Yeah, they're also more receptive to say, like, look, probably everybody will be saved. If I'm not mistaken, everybody's going to be saved, but it still be through Jesus. But I think they've gone to a little more universal position. And some people have said, I could be completely wrong on that. I know nothing about Catholicism.
Yes, and so I also want to talk about Dr. David Wood, who he usually doesn't target atheists. He actually targets Muslims right now.
I know the name. I don't really.
Oh, I know David Wood.
I
know him.
The name does sound familiar. Is he a PhD creationist?
Yeah.
That actually
He's a PhD. I don't know if he's a creationist. I don't know that.
Yeah, he's not creationist.
Okay, but he's a PhD. Yeah, Dr. The name. Yeah.
Studies.
I think he's very effective.
I
you agree, Hank? Or
yes, he's very, very effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing that amazes me with the state of apologetics generally, it's how you can get the same argument in principle and have two people present such massively different calibers of argument when the information exists. You can go onto Google and find a good, solid argument, for example, for the fine-tuning argument. Yet there are still Christian or theist apologists that run out the fine-tuning argument of if the Earth was 100 miles closer to the sun or further away from the sun, we'd be on fire or we'd be frozen. And I'm like, there are really, really, really good arguments for fine-tuning out there. Really genuinely difficult to refute based on the
Luke Barnes.
Fine-tuning is very easy to refute.
Well, hang on. Luke Barnes had a brilliant discussion with Dr. Alex Mappas on fine-tuning, and I got to tell you, it changed my entire view on fine-tuning, because I did look into what some things that Dr. Barnes was talking about. Even I looked into it before, but I happen to think that it is a lot more technical argument than most people give credence to.
That's true. Yeah. And Luke is really an authority on it, and I think one of the good apologists that you were talking about, Steve. The fine-tuning argument is misunderstood by many people.
I agree.
And the people who do understand it, including several well-known atheists, admit that that is probably the best evidence from science.
It's one to definitely not just hand wave away.
Of a divine or a designer or something like that.
Well, it's definitely not one to just hand wave away. And think about this:
you can't hand wave it away.
Multiverse theory, and there's a scholar with reasons to believe, Dr. Swearing, who wrote a book called "Who's Afraid of
Swearing?"
Jeff Swearing, nice guy, super nice guy. I got to meet him in person too. Yeah. I got to meet all the reasons to believe people because I did a show with them. But he gave me a book. It was called "Who's Afraid of the Multiverse," and it was very well written. It's super small. It's like condensed, right? But it just gets the highlights. Right. That's all it's for. But multiverse theory is something that has to be brought into play in order to try to even begin to solve the fine-tuning problem, which is that's a massive theory into itself, right?
No, I'm not sure about that, but fine-tuning is actually pretty easy to hand wave away. So if you assume an omnipotent God, he can keep us alive no matter what state the rest of the universe is in.
That's not the fine-tuning argument, though.
No.
Yeah.
The fine-tuning argument in a nutshell has to do with the fact that there's only certain amounts of possible worlds that exist where you can have some combination of stability of atoms.
I'm not making a fine-tuning, I'm hand waving away.
But you can't just hand wave away that way. Again, we're dealing with a fine structure constant. Right? It's dealing with fundamentals of natural units that if there was some kind of change, we couldn't exist in any type of possible world because you just couldn't have a possible world that had any kind of stability for any kind of complex atomic structures. Yeah, Sai, would you agree on that? As a biochemist?
That's well said. That's well stated.
My background was nuclear reactors, but I did learn a little about physics.
Yeah. That's couldn't just make it keep working anyways.
But that's not the argument, though. The argument has to do with how many possible worlds can exist where we can have that range, which is very limited compared to the possible worlds where we don't exist, those that we couldn't exist. That's the argument.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm making argument. I'm hand waving away because if you assume an omnipotent God,
it has nothing to do with that, though.
I'm not. You don't understand. If we had an omnipotent God, he can keep us working whether or not the numbers work.
But again, this is a scientific argument, though. Yeah.
No, not that. Okay, so
God can't do impossible things supposedly too either. You can't have places where just you can't have something that it exists and doesn't exist. Go ahead, Sai.
Well, let's put it this way. It would be incredibly shocking to find out if we existed in a universe where the fundamental constants did not allow us to exist.
Yeah, I mean, what would it mean?
We couldn't. Exactly.
Yeah, what would it mean? Let's say that the Coulomb barrier had changed, right? Let's say that you couldn't have any kind of hydrogen atoms, right? You couldn't even have electron bonded with some kind of proton where you would have any kind of complex structures. It's just a gluonic mess of soup.
Right.
We couldn't exist because we're clearly a complex being. We are comprised of complexity of atomic structure and molecular structure. So if you would have to redesign the entire universe, and even then, there's only a certain amount of relationships that would even work to make these natural units work with the relationships to each other. Planck's constant, gravitational constant, speed of light.
If you check out Planck's constant, the speed of light, the gravitational force is strong.
You can't talk at the same time because nobody can hear you. John,
sorry,
what?
So what I was saying is that the number of different constants that exist that all have to be set to the precision that they are set at in order for us to have stars forming, which essentially which generate the building blocks that you and I and everybody else are made of. If those constants didn't exist, didn't allow for stars, didn't allow for matter to be created, yet we were sat here having this conversation anyway, I would believe in a God, because that was, you know what I mean?
It's just a probabilistic argument.
But when you look at our universe, and we do have a set of fundamental constants. Now, the argument for obviously the fine tuning is that the likelihood of these constants being so precise that we actually do exist, that they must have been set. There must have been a deity.
Intelligence.
It was designed that way because the chances of it happening on its own are so infinitesimally small. It basically is impossible
compared to all the other possible worlds where the numbers differ.
Yeah, that's the main argument.
Right.
And the idea that an omnipotent God could allow us to exist anyway would be true if we allow for magical universes. But the thing about our universe is it's not magical. It's not heaven. It's a universe ruled by
natural
laws.
Natural laws.
By natural laws, exactly, which have to be obeyed. And if you're going to have a universe with natural laws that can lead to stars, which, as you said, then leads to us, you have to have a universe like that, which allows for stars to live, to become, to exist. And in order to do that, you need all those constants to be set very carefully. So the question is, the answer to that is, well, there must be many, many universes. We happen to live in the right one. That's the multiverse theory. That's fine. That works. But that's the only other answer. If this universe that we know is the only universe, and it is set so precisely, as Steve just said, the chances of that being true are close to zero.
Well, it's one possible answer that we know of right now. Obviously, it's just a model that tries to get around that.
So there may be other answers. There may be some unknown law of physics that requires these constants to be. Those are the three possible solutions.
And let me point out
now the problem.
Good. All right, there you're done.
No, I just finished this by saying. So all three of those are of equal possibility or of equal unknownness. Okay, because we don't really know anything about the multiverse. We have no evidence for it. Some people think that they will never have evidence for it, depending on how you define universe. The same thing is true for God, and the same thing is true for an unknown law of physics. So when you consider all of this, the idea of the fine-tuning, which is true, I mean, it can't be disputed, is evidence for a designer. It doesn't prove it. It might be 30% evidence because there are two other possible explanations, but it is evidence for a divine designer.
Well, I think where people jump the shark with me is when they ascribe their specific God to being the one that was twiddling the knobs.
It's hard. It's a big jump.
Well,
it's a big jump from intelligence. Yeah, agreed. And again, these are not convincing to me. Obviously, I don't believe that there's some kind of intelligence, although I literally cannot say that there is none because I've looked at many of the evidences. I hate the word evidences. It's just evidence. I'm sorry, Aaron. Aaron, look, people know I have history with Aaron anyways, but I mean, I respect the man.
Watch out for all those fishes.
Yeah, but he hates evidences, and he's right. I mean, it's just evidence. But let me ask you though, don't you think it's important to recognize that because these conversations do dive in some deep stuff, I mean, whether it just be theologically, whether it be a philosophy, or it be scientific, dealing with things like astrophysics, quantum mechanics, evolutionary biology, and no single person has an expertise on any of them, and most of us are not experts. You're an expert in your field, biochemistry. Massive respect, because that's probably one of the most difficult. But
right,
you know, it really is. Yeah, no, I don't know how anybody gets through biochemistry. But you know, you wouldn't consider yourself an expert on quantum mechanics. None of us here are, but we want to be able to have those discussions, and all of us do. But I don't even see the modern Christian apologist even tackling things like getting the fine-tuning argument correctly. He's not on a level.
Argument's a very weak argument.
Hang on.
It's not convincing.
Hang on. We all disagree on that, but hang on. But you know,
I'm a theist and you're not.
I know they're not on the level of like Luke Barnes, right? Or so even discussing evolutionary biology, they're not going to be on some level like you or Fuzz Rana are on, as compared to, you know, like Fonda Beatles, who I'm a big fan on Twitter, who's evolutionary biology, or Richard Dawkins, right? So
I watched McGlatchy the other day, his debate, where he showed computer modeling of how DNA is replicated from cell to cell to cell, and the biological machinery. And when you look at that computer modeling, it looks like a sodding car manufacturing.
It's impressive. Yeah, no.
Line.
Well, same thing with
much more complex than a car manufacturer.
Yeah, same thing with macromolecule transportation. You know, I mean, how things get moved around is pretty impressive too.
It really does grind against your intuitions to say that this is unguided. It really does grind against those intuitions. Yep. And there may be an explanation for a good explanation that shows that this is unguided, that it wasn't inspired by some creator. But the fact that it grinds against intuitions so comprehensively makes it a good argument for convincing people, whether it's right or wrong.
Or does it make better arguments for people that are already convinced?
True.
You know, and that's a great point to make, though. A lot of these arguments tend to go with our cognitive biases. I admit that. Many of these arguments for theism tend to have a theist justify their position who already believes, and same thing with atheists. The atheist arguments tend to justify atheism, which, you know, people have already believed that there's no God. So, you know, we all have those kind of biases, and it's very difficult to objectively 100% look at stuff. It's just not going to happen because we have our own personal experiences when we subjectively evaluate these evidence. But the difficulty lies in the fact that many of these arguments are complicated. Even I had who was it? Speed Watkins on Ben on, you know, to talk about modal ontological argumentation, and that is not an easy subject to tackle, right? And not many people are going to go and learn, you know, the basics of modal logic. And so I'm seeing again a resurgence of very low-level argumentation, people that are running these low-level arguments. And I'm going to bring up some names here because my friend Gary pointed these out in the live chat. You know, he says, what about names like, you know, Ken Ham, Ken Hovind, Eric Hovind? Their type of diatribe and absolute nonsensical rhetoric is starting to come back a little bit. I think it's it's not great, but I am noticing a little bit more because they're having a lot more usage of their social media presence that wasn't around, you know, years and years ago. Hovind didn't have the social media presence as he has now. Darth Dawkins, there's a name for you.
I think, unfortunately, a lot of these apologists are arguing from the perspective of common sense and intuition. And
I don't think they're arguing that. Darth Dawkins argues from contradictory presuppositionalization. He's a walking contradiction.
The reason I say that is, like, Kent Hovind says things. You know, he doesn't. You know, he hadn't even heard when he was arguing with Ken Crocoduck. You know, Crocoduck talked about neutron stars, and Hovind's response was incredulity to the notion. I don't even think that you could crush my Buick into something the size of a.
Right.
There's
no
law of physics.
You know. Oddly enough, I met Steve during the second debate Kent Hovind had with Ken Crocoduck.
Yep. Hi, Midnight. Hello.
I figured I'd come in because I heard you talking about my favorite subject in the entire universe. The universe.
What's that?
And my favorite subject is the universe.
How the universe.
Here. Okay. You know.
Real quick, and then Red Comfort and Kirk Cameron are the others who you notice. People are running their arguments again too. Banana Man.
Yeah.
you know,
They never
The
stopped
atheist
finding arguments.
nightmare.
They never stopped. They never took a break.
No, I agree with you, but I think it's coming around again. It comes in cycles. Nephilim free, you know, that kind of base level
Is Steve
argumentation.
still alive?
I assume so, but I don't think he's got the notoriety he once had, because his arguments have just been. I mean, nobody takes him seriously because he just.
I've debated every single one of those people. I
wouldn't call them debates. I think it's more education. Nephilim. Yeah, those are not debates, Si. Those are you educating
No,
them.
see, that's a good point, Steve. But see, that's the problem. I have said that occasionally. When people start talking about things that I know as a professional, I say, I'm not arguing with you, I'm teaching you.
Right.
Because you don't know the subject.
And would you agree?
That especially is true for things like evolution. Most people who argue against evolution don't know what it is.
Correct. Absolutely right.
They don't understand it at all. And when I tell them, no animal ever turns into another animal, they say, oh, well, that's what evolution says.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
So what do you call it? A charity class? This is your charity class?
Yeah, exactly. Free tutoring, right?
I want this elephant to turn into a tree.
Pine trees and elephants. For people that don't know, I have an elephant and a pine tree on most of my streams on this channel. Pine trees and elephants, which goes back to a throwback to the early days of this channel, where people. Hovind was arguing about eukaryotes.
Hovind.
Yeah, was arguing about eukaryotes,
pineapples,
and couldn't understand how a pine tree and elephant were related. So that's a throwback to that. But
I could just imagine, like, when Hovind was arguing with Aaron Ra about that, and when he was arguing with King Crocoduck, like, I've just got an image in his head of all of these concepts being thrown at him, all of these scientific principles being thrown at him, just him furiously Googling on his keyboard.
He doesn't know any of them.
Catch up.
Yeah, he doesn't even do that. He doesn't bother with that.
Gravity.
But it's a good point, and John brought up, Jonathan McLatchie, who is a friend of mine. I have mad respect for. Don't agree with him on theology. I got to meet him in person as well. I had lunch with him and his wife. Wonderful people. And again, these are the people that I want to see elevating the conversation. These are the people I respect, even though I don't agree with them. But they don't do these base level nonsense, atheists hate God kind of stuff. They at least talk about the subject. And would you agree? And I'll ask this to the panel in the live chat, that regardless of your theological beliefs, there are some fundamental facts of the matter. And DNA is DNA. How it replicates, how it's translated, and how it's transcribed, how proteins come about. These are all fundamental things that are just not up for argumentation. They're fundamental facts about basic biology that anybody can go learn by taking an intro to biology course. Anybody can go learn these. Nobody should be disputing any of that stuff. And when you have somebody like Dr. Garte and somebody like Dr. Jonathan McLatchie, who are clearly expertise in those fields, when they're talking about DNA, I don't see either one of you interjecting your personal ideological beliefs in the central dogma of biology. It's just at that point hard science. Would everybody agree with that?
Steve, before anyone answers, like, people can learn if they want to, but hold on, I had this in my head. People can learn about DNA, but not everyone can learn about it, if you got my meaning.
Or want to. But don't you? But I asked that question. Don't you agree that it's ubiquitous to everybody, it's same to everybody? And if you do want to have these discussions, right? Don't you think even the most baby Christian apologist should at least understand some basic fundamentals of these topics? They don't have to be a physicist. They don't have to be a biologist. But I got creationists that don't even know the basics of the laws of logic, telling me and other non-believers that atheism and non-belief is illogical. And I'm like, you don't even know what the law excluded middle is, and you're trying to discuss logic. That's like, that's like a biologist, not even, or geneticist, not even know what DNA stands for. It's just so fundamental, and yet I see it all the time.
This is obviously what you're referring to. I don't know if you didn't name him on purpose. So I won't.
Oh, you can name him. Yeah, you were there.
But yeah, I know, but I won't, because I don't, because he was a nice guy, and
nice guy, just oblivious to the actual arguments. Yeah,
but like with what Hank said before, like all of these old school, sort of Walmart creationists that have been apologists.
Walmart creationists.
Walmart creationists.
I used to work at Walmart, okay? So I resent that.
Nothing to do with the caliber of the employee and everything to do with the quality of their spray cheese, right? The thing is, as Hank says, they're still there. They're still plugging along. But we've grown bored and intellectually bored
Right.
and just exasperated with their arguments, and now there's a new tranche of apologists coming through that are picking up the arguments from these morons rather than picking up the arguments from the likes of McClatchy. And I'm like, why would you do that?
John, can we
Why
call
would-
John? Can we
No,
call? Hey, wait, John,
it-
Can we call them the cheese whiz of apologetics?
Yeah,
That's it.
basically what they
Run
are.
with that, guys. So all these low level, newer Christian apologists are coming around the scene because people, come around YouTube all the time. Names and faces changes. We're going to call these low level ones cheese whiz apologists from now on.
Yeah, McClatchy and his brethren are sort of like an ice age brie, and then Kent Hovind is aerosolized cheese.
There you
It's
go.
just
So, yeah, but McClatchy didn't get me back to theism. It was an article by Roy Sorson, Fictional Theism. So
I know what fictionalism is.
So you
but-
said you're making judgment. They're the best theist arguments, but maybe they started above, but did they convert people?
I know McClatchy, and he's not here at the moment. He will be on a future episode. I talk to him quite frequently. I think he's there really to help theists justify their positions. I mean, sure, he wants to convert people. I mean, that is part of the Christian process and beliefs that they are kind of set out to spread the good word, so to speak. And some are more activists than others, but I think most of them recognize that they're not a lot. When you come onto YouTube, there's not a lot of conversions happening. I mean, when they do happen, they're pretty notable. Like just recently, Ian, what's her name? John, the fourth horseman.
Yeah,
so Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Yeah,
Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Yeah, but
Ali,
she, in my view, has oddly taken a very utilitarian.
Yeah,
approach to
her arguments are not good. I'm sorry.
yeah.
I agree with Richard Dawkins. Her arguments for converting to Christianity was not based upon the theological beliefs of Christianity, but the utility of
it's a social
and I think that's a very poor way to have it.
She's using it as a bulwark against the progressives and the woke march through institutions.
I find that to be intellectually dishonest.
I think if she approached it because the thing is, I have, so a friend of mine who I work with, I wouldn't classify him as a Christian. I don't even really know what he would classify himself as, but he's not quite a theist, but he's also not quite an agnostic either. A very good friend of mine. I trust him a great deal. We work together, and with speaking to him, I didn't really have anything to do with religious institutions, but like for the first time this year, we took the family and the kids to the Christingle service at Christmas. It's a beautiful church down the road. It was a great experience, and I went the cultural history of it and the cultural experience of it without actually believing it. If Ayaan Hirsi Ali had taken that approach, I would have had much more time.
Yeah, I mean, because cultural Christians are a thing.
But to want to pick up Christianity, the faith, and use it as a cudgel against a progressive, I find distasteful. I don't like it.
Yeah, I think maybe even Cy would probably agree with you, because then you're just using cultural Christianity in instead of becoming a devout Christian, considering their personal salvation and wanting other people to be saved, and which is a core aspect of the Christian faith.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm a Unitarian Universalist.
But generally speaking,
that's any Christian faith.
Yeah.
Well, not specific. Well, just
in the biggest groups of Christianity, they believe in salvation of some kind. Obviously.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, you can say that.
Yeah.
Well, but I in respect to this, Steve, what you said about Jonathan McClatchy, I think also applies to me and to many other people who might be considered apologists, which is, it's not so much, I don't think the emphasis should be or is on trying to save atheists and get them to convert, but to hold on to the people that we now have. Because as everyone knows, the trend is for Christians to deconvert, especially younger people.
Far more
And
often.
I all my work, my books and things that I write is all related to trying to explain to students in particular who may have gone to a Christian high school or a Christian college, that they don't have to give up science and keep their Christian faith, and they don't have to give up their faith if they want to be scientists.
And I
The
love
two are
that.
not
I respect you so much for that, because people know that I'm an avid anti-young Earth creationist, but I have a lot of friends that are young Earth creationists. I have a lot of PhD friends. I mean, people know that Dr. Sarfati, I get along just fine, and he gets along with nobody. I mean,
right.
Have you had instances with Sarfati?
Not directly.
Okay,
no.
he's
But
well known for not being well liked and to get along with. But I've seen that.
But
I've got along with him for long before I had.
Well, you get
NonSequitur
along
Show.
with all kinds of people.
I know,
Steve.
right?
It's
It's weird.
to me.
Yeah,
It's a
and
mystery. Always has been.
But I also have a lot of people that hate me because I get along with good people.
No.
Yeah, well, weird, right? But
I have that too.
but him and I don't really talk about young creationism. But I love the fact that you want to educate people and say, look, you can still accept scientific facts and believe in Christianity. I have no issue with that, right? Because I'm not out there trying to deconvert anybody or convert anybody. I have the discussions. I'm not out there trying to make people atheist or agnostic or theist. Take your pick. I explain how to justify them, and I have the topics of those discussions. But I'm not an evangelist. You're not an evangelist, right? We're not out there trying to change the mindsets of people on their theological perspectives. We're trying to change the mindsets of how they approach science, and in my case, science and philosophy. That's us in a nutshell. And I think
about right.
Yeah, and if people change their minds on it, that's fine. I've had, it's so funny. I've converted more agnostics to atheists by just talking to people, even though I'm not trying to do that because I'm not an atheist. But they're like, oh crap, I don't have to prove that God exists to be an atheist. Shaka God said I do. Well, Shaka God's wrong. So be that as may. People
Steve,
change
on that
decisions.
note, I'm going to have to leave.
Yeah, we're going to be wrapping this up, so I appreciate this. Any final words? Because I usually 90 minutes is my max, and it's getting close. So how about with this? We're going to wrap this up. I do want to let people know that I am going to have a similar discussion next Wednesday, and if Sai is available, that's fine. But it's going to be with Eric Hernandez. Hopefully, there's a bunch of other people that want to join. Obviously, we can only have like 6 people at a time because I'm using StreamYards. But I do want to have these conversations more often. If you want to become a member of the panel, let me know.
StreamYards goes to 10 people at the free level.
Is it 10? I thought it was 6.
Yes, it's 10.
Oh, maybe they boosted it. Okay. But if you want to become a part of the discussion, let me know. Follow me on Twitter, and you can message me there. I have 2 accounts there, NonSequitur Show and my personal, which is Steve McRae, either one. And become a patron of the channel. I do take super chats. I'm happy to have funding because I still have not broken even on this channel after 5 years. So that's just the fact. But I do with this because I enjoy it. I love talking to you guys. I love having these discussions. So even though it has cost me money to have this YouTube channel, in the end, it's still worth it because I've gotten out my opinions, and I've had wonderful guests on to express theirs, and we're going to try to continue that. So, Sygart, why don't you wrap it up? Then I'll talk to Hank and John for a few minutes, and then we'll call it a day. Sound good?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back. I think with Eric here, I'll be in the background because he's really a champion apologist, and will have a lot more to say. I might just, if I'm able to show up, I'll just come, and sort of maybe contribute a little bit, but it would be exciting to hear Eric.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
and he comes from a very different perspective, and I think we can get more into the theological aspects.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, Si. I appreciate
nice meeting you guys.
Yes, I.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye.
All right. Why don't you guys wrap it up for us? Hank, go ahead and get your last words in. Then talk. I want to talk to John for just a minute or two. Then we're out of day.
Yeah. So you can continue the discussion on philosophy and religion on a channel called The Machine Lies. It's run by a guy named Muhammad. He wrote a book on pretty much Abrahamism, and he does a presentation for a couple hours, and he has an open panel for like 5 or 6 more hours. So I'll be hanging out there.
Okay. Thank you, Hank. And John, just to let you know, I do have some people that have messaged me for various shows, ideas and things of that nature that are right up your alley, kind of dealing with philosophy. And oh, by the way, Hank left. I didn't kick him out or anything.
See you, Hank.
But he's listening, and that's cool. But if you wanted to do a co-host episode on some of those stuff, I know you're 8 hours ahead, but we're arranging around your time schedule because I love your input on this stuff.
Yeah, no, I'd love to, and I keep on every time I do this. I keep have people asking me for my channel. I don't have a channel. I'm just
maybe
interested.
Maybe it's about time, man.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. We're running a business and stuff, and kids.
We all got lives,
honestly,
but hey, I managed to fit it in, and like I said, I'm going to be doing more on this channel. It's growing right now, matter of fact, and I want to thank people promoting it. So.
No, I'm absolutely happy to help you out, but I'm unless somebody wants to provide me with a 36-hour day and a 9-day week, I don't know where I'd have the time to start my own channel. But I just quickly with obviously Eric Hernandez. It's Eric Hernandez, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I watched his debate the other day. I don't know who the young lad that he was debating, but it was he seemed to be some sort of variation of a physical reductionist, and obviously Hernandez is a dualist.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting. The debate topic was evidence for a soul. And it was just a fascinating debate because they were talking about, like the young lad was saying that no, there isn't a soul. What we experience as consciousness is the process of the brain. It's the
I didn't watch it, but I'm familiar. I know they had that discussion. I think they took it from a source physicalist point of view, where you have the physical substrate and then the mental that does exist. Comes from the source, which is not the same as property dualism, but it's actually similar to a mono. What is it? Substance monist point of view, a singular point of view.
So it was interesting because like Hernandez seemed to be using the law of identity, and I didn't actually agree with how he was using the law of identity. Mm-hmm. He was saying that if your thoughts can be true or false, but the process can't be true or false, then there's a difference between them, and the difference between them is what constitutes the soul. Because in physical reductionism, there shouldn't be a difference.
So he's trying to bridge the mind-body gap.
But basically, yeah. But that's like saying the young lad in this circumstance was saying no, the physical matter of the brain is the physical matter of the brain, and the thought is what's running. And he was like, but if you look at somebody's brain, you can't see their thoughts. And the guy was like, well, yes, we can sort of if we deploy technology. You can see.
Well, you can see the effects. You can't see the thoughts because they're internalized. But you know what? I tell you what. Go ahead.
It was also the case. I was thinking, but if you take a computer apart, you can see the bits of hardware that make up the computer, but you can't see the PDF file that's on the segment.
Yeah, you can reconstruct the data, but I don't know if you can do that with the brain. But you certainly couldn't experience it.
But it was also the case that it was like the distinction between I have legs, but walking is the process. In the same way as I have a brain, and thoughts are the process.
Well, I'll tell you what. I don't know how the law of identity. Yeah, I don't get that how.
You wouldn't use the law of identity to state that walking and legs.
I'm sure Eric was all over that.
I'm sure if and when I ask him, I'm sure he will have a perfectly. Okay. I'm sure he'll take me to pieces. But I was just
Eric was Eric was running that law of identity.
Yeah,
the other guy. Okay, I have to ask him about it. No. I don't see how that corresponds with each other. But Eric's a smart guy. I'm sure he has.
I may have fundamentally and most probably have misunderstood his argument, which is why I want to ask him.
Look, there are ways of getting around. If you really wanted to, the law of identity, there are logic. You can create a logic that doesn't have it, and there's ways about there that are very, very nuanced. But it doesn't really. It serves really no purpose to me. But any axiom you can dismiss, right? You can say, I don't want to take this axiom. I want to take other axioms, and that includes the law of identity. But you get some wild things when you start saying something isn't itself, right?
We'll get Robin to explain.
You can certainly hypothesize it and say, what if this was the case? And like I said, it gets into some weird stuff. But anyways, I'm going to have a discussion on that on Philosophy of Mind as well. I have somebody that emailed me on that. So I'll try to get with you on that. But let me wrap this up. Okay, John?
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah, always a pleasure having you on. So thanks, guys, for watching. I hope you guys got a little bit out of this. I mean, again, we kind of just touched on the discussion on the state of the debate and Christian apologists. But I think it kind of set the ground for what we're going to be talking about in the future with Eric Hernandez and other people, because we are going to bring an apologist on both sides, atheist and theist. We do want to have discussions from people with vastly different viewpoints. And as you know, I just try to foster those discussions, and I find them to be fascinating. So if you're interested, please message me on Twitter, email me, what have you. I have pretty substantial social media presence where if somebody says they can't get a hold of me, they're not looking hard enough. I got Facebook, Twitter, email. I don't use Snapchat. I don't use Instagram that much, even though I have one. I don't use TikTok. But anyways, like I said, if you do want to be part of the process, feel free to become a Patreon. Helps pay for some cost. So I thank you guys. Thank you, moderators out there, Artistic Shill, Tau Software, and viewers. Let me know what you think in the comment section. That's a big thing. The comments. If you're commenting, it absolutely adds to the algorithm and helps. So if you're out there and you've watched this, leave me a comment, good, bad, or indifferent. Just don't be insulting. Don't be mean to any of the guests. We like to foster high level conversations until there's time for a dumpster fire like George Lujek, who I will be bringing back on. He wants to come back on. So with that, guys, have a good night, and we'll see you next time on the Non Sequitur Show.